everyone. I'm Judge John D'Amato, and on behalf of the Milwaukee Bar Association, I want to welcome all of you to the 2019 Milwaukee Bar Association Supreme Court Judicial Forum. I want to start out by thanking the Milwaukee Bar Association for hosting this forum. They've been hosting a judicial forum for over 30 years. That's because of their commitment to having an informed electorate. I would also like to thank the media outlets who are here today. We have the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Milwaukee Courier, the Wisconsin Law Journal, WisconsinEye, Wisconsin Public Radio, Fox 6, and WISN-TV. They help get the word out to the public because it's important to have an informed electorate. I specifically want to thank our two candidates, Judge Lisa Neubauer and Judge Brian Hagedorn, the candidates seeking election to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I thank them for being here today to address their candidacy and to answer your questions. Now let me explain the format that we follow at this judicial forum. Each candidate is going to be given 2 minutes to make an opening statement. The order has been based on a drawing that we did a few minutes ago. You will have an opportunity to submit written questions for the candidates. We have cards on the end of the table. If you have a question, fill it out and submit it. Your questions, however, have to be addressed to both candidates. Your questions can be hard-hitting, but they must be respectful. I will vet the questions for appropriate. I will pass them on to our moderators, Steve Walters, who will be asking the questions of the candidates. The candidates will have questions asked to them alternately. Each candidate gets 2 minutes to answer a question, and at the conclusion, each candidate will be given 1 minute to make a closing remark. We do have a timekeeper who is here to keep the answers on time, and our moderator will enforce these time limits. Our moderator is Steve Walters. He's been a news reporter for many years, covering Wisconsin state government, and he's the current senior producer of the WisconsinEye. We're honored to have Steve with us once again. Please welcome Steve Walters.
Thank you very much. Is this okay? Is there a switch? We will resolve this momentarily. How's that? There we go. WisconsinEye associate to help.
There we go. Okay. Just really.
How's that? Lay it.
Test, test, test. I got one.
Test.
Here we go.
Plan B.
Sorry about that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Here, I'll get you. If you want to pocket that, I'll get you clipped up.
Okay.
If you don't mind. Okay, let's try that.
How's that? All right. Yes, but it's off. Promise. Yeah. Let's start again. I'm going to welcome you all. I'm going to provide some introductions before the closing remarks. I'm going to use the summaries, the bios from the State Bar of Wisconsin. We'll start with Judge Lisa Neubauer, serves on the Wisconsin Court of Appeals, having first been appointed by Governor Doyle in 2007. Winning re-election to the position in 2008 and again in 2014. The Wisconsin Supreme Court appointed her to serve as the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals in 2015 and reappointed her in 2018. She also serves on the Supreme Court Finance Committee as co-chair of the State Bar of Wisconsin Bench Bar Committee and chair of the Bench Bar Court Funding Subcommittee. Before becoming a judge, Judge Noubar served as a Wisconsin litigation attorney partner at Foley & Lardner. She also served as a law clerk for Barbara Crabb, then Chief Judge of the United States District Court, Western District of Wisconsin. Judge Neubauer, thank you. Judge Brian Hagedorn currently serves on the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. He was appointed to the bench in 2015 by Governor Walker, won re-election to a new 6-year term in April of 2017. Judge Hagedorn was appointed by the Wisconsin Supreme Court to serve on the Wisconsin Judicial Commission and is a member of the State Bar of Wisconsin Bench Bar Committee. He served as an Assistant Attorney General in the Wisconsin Department of Justice, a law clerk for Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Michael Gableman, and as an attorney in private practice at a Milwaukee firm. He's a graduate of Northwestern University School of Law, where he was the president of the Federalist Society. Prior to his judicial service, Judge Hagedorn served as chief legal counsel for Governor Walker for 5 years. Opening statements now, and by process of a draw, Judge Neubauer, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Milwaukee Bar Association. Thank you for the media to be here, and thank you, Steve. Really grateful to have this opportunity to speak to the voters about what is going to be such an important election on April 2nd when we vote for our next Supreme Court Justice. So yes, I'm Lisa Neubauer. I'm Chief of the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. I live in Racine, Wisconsin with my husband Jeff, where we've raised 3 wonderful children. I have over 30 years experience in the law. I was a litigator at Foley and Lardner here in Milwaukee for almost 20 years. I rose through the ranks. I made partner. I had a very successful practice. I joined the Court of Appeals in 2008, and as Mr. Walters said, I was elected in 2008 and again in 2014. I was appointed to the court to be chief judge of our court by the Supreme Court in 2015 and again in the spring of 2018. I am running because I am fighting for a fair, impartial, and independent court. My record of over 11 years on the Court of Appeals shows that in thousands of decisions, I have been fair, impartial, and independent. Our people in this state need to know that when they walk into our courtrooms at any level, trial court, Court of Appeals, or the Supreme Court, that there is going to be a level playing field, no thumb on the scale. That's the kind of judge I've been for over 10 years. I now have and am honored to have the support of over 340 judges from around our state. That is 98% of the endorsing judges in this race. They know our record, and they trust that I will be fair, impartial, and independent if I am honored to be elected on April 2nd.
Thank you. Judge Hagedorn, please.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be with you all as well. Thank you for your interest and your engagement in this race. I'm a Milwaukee kid. I was born and raised here in Milwaukee. We never grew up with any money in our family. We never grew up with any political connections or anything like that. I'm just one of many families that just a bunch of ordinary citizens who care about their community. Both of my grandfathers were in the service. One fought during the Korean War, was later a Wauwatosa police officer. My other grandfather fought across Europe during World War II. He was actually a prisoner of war as well for a time and helped liberate the concentration camp Dachau. And in the middle of all that, I began to have a passion of my own for public service. Didn't know what that was going to look like, but that eventually took me to law school at Northwestern University and then back to Wisconsin here to live and practice and raise my family. My wife and I, my wife is here today, Christina. We've been married for 17 years. We have 5 beautiful children together, 5, 8, 11, 13, and 15. So our house is loud and it's lots of fun. And we love raising our family right here in Wisconsin. My career began here at a firm in Milwaukee, and then after that really have spent most of my career in public service. I clerked at our Supreme Court, so I've been there. I've done the work. I've seen it firsthand. I was an assistant attorney general at the Department of Justice, and then as Governor Walker's chief counsel, I gave advice at the highest of levels and was involved, quite frankly, in some of the most significant cases in state history. And, that's helped shape my philosophy now as a judge. I've been on the bench where I've been able to put that philosophy into practice. My job is to say what the law is and not what I think the law should be. That's the rule of law. We want the rule of law in our courts. not the rule of judges. We want judges who are going to interpret and uphold the Constitution as written, not picking and choosing, not turning every issue into a political question, but being faithful to the law as written. That's what kind of judge I've been, and that's what kind of justice I'll be on the Supreme Court.
Thank you very much. Before we get into specific questions, just a reminder, if you have questions, they should be written down on these pieces of paper and raise your hand, and the Bar Association staff will collect them. They will be vetted by Judge D'Amato, who we all esteemingly respect. So, first question. Let's just talk about general judicial philosophies. The Wisconsin Supreme Court is viewed as a judicial policy-making body. What judicial philosophy will you bring to the court, and what in your life led you to that philosophy? Judge Hagedorn, could you go first? Because in recent appearances, you've been calling yourself a textualist and originalist. I apologize if I didn't get that right, but thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This is a really important question. My opponent in our last debate didn't really want to answer the question, and she doesn't want to tell people what she really believes about these issues, but I will, because there's a reason why we have debates over nominations to the United States Supreme Court, and elections here to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, because judicial philosophies matter. They absolutely matter, and voters deserve to know what ours are. So I am an originalist and a textualist, and what that means is my job is to be faithful to the law as it's written. It means it doesn't matter which political party writes the law. It doesn't matter whether I think a given law or constitutional provision is good or bad policy. It means those things have no place. Partisan politics, personal views should have no place at the Wisconsin Supreme Court. That's why I said my job is to say what the law is and not what I think the law should be. And the way you know what the law is by reading it. That's what textualism is. That's what originalism is. It's being faithful to the language of our Constitution and text as written. So I would look to justices like Justice Scalia, Justice Thomas, Justice Gorsuch as models for carrying that out. People can have that same philosophy and disagree on cases. It doesn't mean there's every case is an easy case or there's an answer to every question that's obvious. But that is the starting point. That's what judges are there to do. And that's how we keep personal views out of the court, by looking at the law as written.
Judge Noubar, on judicial philosophy, please.
Thank you. Yes, I've been very clear about my judicial philosophy from literally the day I announced I was running for this position and before that. My judicial philosophy is very straightforward. I am somebody who follows the Constitution, who follows the law, and what does that mean? It means that we need to be fair, impartial, and independent by following the law, following the Constitution. When people walk into our courtrooms, they need to have confidence that the judge, whether it's the trial court, the Court of Appeals, or the Supreme Court, is not going to have an ideology, any thumb on the scale, any predetermined outcome, any sense that they are going to receive anything other than justice. And that's the kind of judge I have been in literally thousands of cases over 11 years of my service on the Court of Appeals. That is why I have the support of 98% of the endorsing judges in this race. Now, my opponent has made his judicial philosophy quite clear. For example, in extensive writings on a blog where he opined about really important constitutional issues that will have significant impact on the people of our state. Now, the question for the voters is, in light of those writings not on do you like sunsets or popcorn, writings on constitutional issues that are at issue every day in our Wisconsin courts, who are the voters going to look to trust? Is this person going to be fair, impartial, and independent?
Thank you. Next question. In my decades covering the Capitol, it's very interesting to me that now we are seeing millions spent on Supreme Court races, nonpartisan Supreme Court races. So my question, and I believe it goes to Judge Noubar, it's your turn. What level of donations, 50,000, 100,000, 200, 500,000, to a justice's campaign should trigger a recusal in a case involving organizations that made those donations? Justice Noubar, please.
Thank you. That's a really important question, and it's a question that's come up constantly on the campaign trail for me. The question really goes to when there are parties who are spending literally millions of dollars in our Supreme Court elections, at what level do the justices need to recuse when that same party comes before the court? At what level does the public lose confidence that that justice is going to be fair, impartial, and independent? So this is a question that goes part and parcel with the issues at issue in this race. And for folks who don't know, the listeners, the Supreme Court adopted a rule that basically says every judge gets to decide for themselves, and when presented with a petition that asked for more in terms of specifics about when recusal would be appropriate in light of contributions, our Supreme Court declined to even have a hearing. To me, that is shameful. It is not appropriate in our democracy that our court would say, we don't even want to hear from the people on something that is so important to the confidence of our people in our courts. So I have said on the campaign trail, I would definitely be in favor of having hearings, and I would be in favor of considering a stronger rule. What that rule would look like, I'd want to have an open mind with everything I do, every case I hear, every issue I hear. I come to it with an open mind, and we would need to look at the issue, hear from the stakeholders, see what's working, what's not in other states. Now, my opponent on recusal issues has really declined to address fundamental issues. For example, he talked about it in his opening statement, has said that he was involved in drafting and defending significant litigation in our state as an advocate, but not necessarily committing to recuse. Again, the people need to look at this information and decide who do they trust to be fair, impartial, and independent.
Judge Hagedorn, please, you can have a few extra seconds.
Thank you. Well, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has appointed me to serve on the Wisconsin Judicial Commission, and so one of my roles is to help oversee the Code of Judicial Conduct in Wisconsin. They've entrusted me with that. And so I am well aware of the types of issues that come before the court and the types of issues related to the Code of Judicial Conduct, including recusal questions. And let me say a couple things. Number one, I am certainly open to having conversations about that. The Code of Conduct in some ways is pretty outdated. And I think it's important for us to ensure we have confidence in our courts. So I'm certainly open to a discussion about how we can improve the rule. I as well have an open mind. My opponent hasn't come out in favor of any proposal as well. She's just open to a discussion, as am I. The more interesting question on these issues is, why do we see so much special interest money that gets involved in these races? You know, my opponent began this campaign talking about how toxic all this special interest money is, and now all she does is repeat the same lies and misrepresentations spouted by the same liberal special interest groups that are all in for her campaign. She says one thing and she is doing another, and that's been a consistent theme throughout this race. The real reason why we see special interest money in these races, quite frankly, is because judges have over time taken power that the Constitution doesn't originally give it, and they've inserted themselves into every question. It's no surprise that the justice we're seeking to replace here, who's been very much a political activist on the court, Judge Neubauer, has held her up as a model for judicial philosophy. And about 15 years ago, that philosophy had free reign at the court. And when that happened, that's when big special interest money started coming into these races. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that when the judges act like a super legislature, the people treat them that way. And the best remedy for this is for judges to be faithful to apply the law as written, saying what the law is, not what they think the law should be, not deeming themselves to be the rulers of the people on every controversial question of the day. That's what I'm committed to as a judge.
Thank you. I want to stay with the issue of recusals and pose specific examples. Judge Hagedorn, I think it's your turn to go first. Judge Neubauer referred to your blog post. So let me ask this question. How would you respond to a motion to recuse based on your law school blog posts on LGBT issues, sir?
Sure. Well, again, when it comes to those, let me just say up front, my record is I always treat everyone with dignity and respect, and I always have. And that is absolutely my record. Nobody has ever raised one issue related to my judicial record of a time that I've ever let my own personal views get into my cases, because I never have and I never will. First of all, let me put these in context. These were blog posts before I was even a lawyer. Those are not the central issue in this race. And the answer is I will apply the law as it's written to everyone. I've said that from the beginning. I've been faithful to that in everything that I've done as a judge. No, there's no reason for me to recuse, because I'm not running on my personal views on anything. I'm running on the law and following the law. I will follow all binding precedent from the United States Supreme Court. I've said that from the beginning. I've always done that as a judge, and I always will. That's why all you see is empty rhetoric based upon old blog posts, because Judge Neubauer wants to put personal views front and center in these races rather than the law. She can't attack my judicial record, and so she needs to attack other things. And judges who put personal views front and center are not impartial judges. What we see is a bias by my opponent, and that's what we're seeing in this own race. She has her own creed. She has her own views that she wants to put front and center in this race, because she doesn't want to talk about the law in judicial philosophy. That's why she's held up judges who have as their model a more political form of judging, because that's what her and the liberal special interest allies supporting her want out of our courts. I don't. I don't have any agenda. I don't have any political considerations that go into my judging, and nobody has ever accused me of that, because there never have been and there never will be.
Judge Noubar, a specific question, follow-up question on the same point. Unions, according to the disclosure reports, have contributed $118,000 a year campaign. How would you respond to a motion to recuse in a case involving one of those unions, Your Honor?
Well, I've been so proud to get the support of so many people across this state. You know, starting with 8,000 signatures on my nomination papers, I literally have thousands and thousands of donations now that are coming in under $20. I have my campaign finance report is going to be very fat. And so I am really proud. I've accepted the legal limit for every group, and I have sought support far and wide, as I have throughout my campaign, broad bipartisan support. I would like to respond to a few things that my opponent just said on the issues of recusal, because the blog post was written when he was the father of two. He was well into his legal career, and again, these are not they're not issues about, you know, what kind of flowers do you like. These are key constitutional issues, and the recusal analysis is not simply whether someone tells people I can put my personal side of view. That disregards the public's perspective, and it is the public's perspective that matters. Our judicial code says that judges can't be biased, they can't be prejudiced. Our judicial code says that it is the public's perspective of whether a judge can be fair, impartial, and independent. So the analysis, any analysis that disregards the public perspective is an analysis that doesn't really embrace a true recusal analysis. Again, our public has to have confidence that our courts are going to be fair, impartial, and independent. And that is the appropriate analysis, not about us, not about someone telling you they can put their personal views aside.
Can I respond just briefly to that,
30
Steve,
seconds, please, Your Honor.
I'd like to point out that Judge Neubauer did not answer the question. This is a regular issue we're finding in our conversations, that Judge Neubauer does not want to answer the question. She does not want to tell people what she really believes about issues. And I would also further point out here that nobody's criticizing any of my work as a judge ever. This is just simply going back to put personal issues front and center, because Judge Neubauer apparently believes that that's what judging is about. It's about putting personal views front and center rather than following the law. I have always followed the law as a judge, and I always will.
Last question on the issue of recusals. Should justices publicly state reasons why they are withdrawing from a case? Judge Noubar, I think it's your turn to go first.
Well, that's an interesting question. It hasn't been the tradition, and it hasn't been, to my knowledge, something that's been done, and I'm frankly not even sure talked about. So I would definitely want to consider that issue the same way I consider every issue, which is with an open mind, hear from people, hear from the public, and get a full airing of that issue.
Judge Hagedorn, please.
Yeah, I think Judge Noubar and I are in agreement on that. I think it's an important question. I think sometimes if you're recusing from a case, it is good to let people know the answer to that. But there's lots of cases. See the Supreme Court reviews petitions for review, for example, and it would be impractical for, I think, the Supreme Court justices every time you step away from a case to give a reason for that. But I think it's important for the public to know why you're recusing. And the goal of all this, of course, is to help people have confidence in our courts. That's the end goal, and certainly a goal that I share.
Judge Hagedorn, in Friday's State Bar Association debate, you accused Judge Neubauer of this is your word, shameful attack on people of faith. So my question is your personal faith a reason why voters should vote for you on April 2nd? And Judge Neubauer, is Judge Hagedorn's personal faith a reason voters should not vote for him? Judge Hagedorn.
Thank you. Well, yes, certainly those attacks have been shameful. And I can't tell you, as I'm traveling across the state, how many people have come up to me. They see the ads that are run on TV. They see the statements that have been released by my opponent. And this is not just having to do with me. This is a trend we're seeing in our society in general. It is targeting people of faith, saying you cannot be a faithful Christian, you cannot be a faithful person of faith of whatever your conviction might be, and also be a judge at the same time. Again, everyone who's ever come before me in court, I treat with dignity and respect. Nobody has ever asserted otherwise. The way I treat people in my personal life, nobody is asserting anything otherwise in this. So what we're seeing is just an effort to highlight faith. No, people should not vote for or against me on the basis of my faith. I have never put my personal moral views or my personal religious views front and center in this race. I have run on my faithful commitment to the law. But Judge Neubauer and all the special interest allies that are supporting her are. Why? Because that's what they think judges do. They think judges should put personal, moral, and religious views and political views front and center. It's why you continue to see these sorts of attacks. And that is wrong. There's no religious test for public office. That's what our Constitution says. It says that religious freedom for everybody should be protected. I'm not running to impose my own personal religious beliefs on anyone, but you darn well be sure I am going to protect everyone's right to religious freedom, including my own. Our country is founded on the idea that we can agree to disagree on important questions and yet still have shared goals as a society. I believe that to my core. That's what freedom of speech is about. That's what freedom of religion is about. And I am deeply committed to protecting everyone's religious freedom. Judge Neubauer, with her bias that she's shown against people of faith, has shown she obviously does not believe that. She cannot be protected to defend our constitutional rights, and I will.
And just a reminder, Judge Neubauer, my question was, is Judge Hagedorn's personal faith the reasons voters should not vote for him on April 2nd?
I said at the outset that what this race is really about is ensuring that our public has confidence in a fair, impartial, and independent judiciary. The wonderful thing about this electoral process of us going all over the state, of going into debates like this, visiting courthouses, and getting information from voters, is that information about the candidates is discussed. And I don't think that information equates to attacks on these key issues that the voters have. There is a lot of information that the voters now have to consider. And in my view, that's not an attack. So, beyond the blog posts, my opponent has acted upon his beliefs. He has founded a school that's been discussed in the media, and that school bans gay students, gay parents, gay teachers, gay board members. It bans unmarried heterosexual people from having sex, as I read it. And my opponent has acted by speaking, when he was a judge, year after year after year after year, to a group that's been labeled a hate group. because of their positions. So this is not an attack in my view. This is information. It's information that is important for the voters to digest, to consider. And again, ultimately, who do the voters trust to be fair, impartial, and independent?
If I could respond to that,
30
please.
seconds, please, Your Honor.
The idea that volunteering at your kid's Christian school somehow disqualifies you for the bench is absurd. Many of you went to Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, other schools of faith that had policies that regulate, by the way, staff, not students or parents, has been misreported. My opponent wants to continue to pass on misinformation. And there's nothing wrong, there's nothing inconsistent with living out your faith in your own life and also being a faithful judge. There's nothing wrong with speaking to a Christian legal organization about how to make your difference with a legal career. Those kinds of attacks, again, they are targeted at people of faith, not just me, people of faith generally. They have no place in a race like this.
Judge Neubauer, Judge Hagedorn has repeatedly said, and he said it again today, you cannot name one ruling in which he issued that showed his personal views. Can you name one? And Judge Hagedorn, can you cite one ruling made by Judge Neubauer that reflects what you say is the desire of her desire and the goal of her supporters to turn the court into your term last Friday, political playground for liberals? Judge Neubauer.
Thank you for the question. Well, as the voters may not know, many in the room do, Judge Hagedorn and I sit on the same court, and so we're frequently on opinions together. And ours is a court where we really value greatly collegiality, which we have had a long, long tradition of on District 2. So I am very disinclined to specifically address cases upon which we've sat together or cases that our court has decided, because I do think that it's important not only for purposes of our relationship, but also for purposes of the voters can look at the decisions and decide for themselves. We literally have hundreds and hundreds of decisions out there. So, the question for the voters, again, is, do you believe that we will be fair, impartial, and independent? And, I want to say that not only do I have the support of 98 of the endorsing judges, but that's 25 of the judges from the Court of Appeals. Now, our court, the court we sit on, has 16 current judges. 10 of those are supporting me. Here in Milwaukee County, Judges Brennan, Judges Dugan, Judge Kessler, and I also have the support of 15 Court of Appeals judges who have retired. That's 25 judges who probably are the people in our state who know our work the best, who actually read all of these decisions. And I am so proud to have that kind of support of the people who know my work, who know my opponent's work, and are supporting me.
Judge Hagedorn, can you cite one case showing what you believe to be the liberal bias of your opponent?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I think it's an important question. And, Judge Noubar, I just want to point out, she has not been able to name a single case, and she can't. She can't name a single case even if she wanted to, because I have never, ever put my personal views front and center. She's never, in the course of our conferences or in the course of any of our internal writings, ever accused me of doing that either, because she can't, because I've never done that and I never will. The way these things typically play out, we don't get a lot of big picture political cases at the Court of Appeals. Those tend to come to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, or they don't come to us in general. We get a lot of cases that are simpler cases where we agree the vast majority of time. But there are a couple of instances where I do believe my opponent has at times let her personal views come into those cases, and I've said so in public writings, and so I think I can say so here again. The State v. Denny case, I thought it was a case where she had her sense of justice, and this is typically the way I see it play out when I read circuit court judges decide cases or with other judges. They look to their sense of right and wrong. And whenever anybody says that's just wrong, whenever a judge say that, I always think to myself, that's not the question. The question is, what does the law say? And that's how I conduct myself. We had a recent case where Judge Neubauer and I disagreed relating to a marital settle agreement, where I thought that my colleague put put her own views front and center in terms of the just outcome in that case as she saw it. And that's typically the way these things play out. The other thing I would just note is Judge Noubar and I actually work with two colleagues directly, day in and day out. The only one that's endorsing this race, the people who really know our work the best, is supporting me in this race, Judge Gundrum. And the people who review our work on the really tough cases, the Supreme Court, I have 5 Supreme Court justices who are supporting my candidacy because they know me, they trust me, and understand that I do law and I do it really at a high level. Thank you.
I'm going to intersperse some questions from the audience. Thank you. Thank you, Judge D'Amato, for vetting them. First question, it's your turn, Judge Hagedorn. Do you consider your appointment to the bench by Governor Walker to be an advantage or disadvantage to your candidacy? Judge Neubauer, obviously. Do you consider your appointment by Governor Doyle to be an advantage or disadvantage? Judge Hagedorn, please.
I'm really proud of my work for Governor Walker as his chief legal counsel. You know, I didn't do politics, I did law for him. And I did law at a very, very high level. I was litigating some of the most significant cases in state history. I was giving advice at the highest of levels. I was regularly before the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and I see how important the work they do is. By the way, I've been in these courts, and I've seen what happens when you have a model like Judge Neubauer is upheld as a model for judging, the justice we want to replace, who's political. I could tell you how the justice we're seeking to replace, how she was going to vote on every single case I had in the court. She didn't like my client. She didn't like my client's politics, and so she was going to rule against her. So I've been on the side of political judging. I've been someone who's seen that firsthand, and it's wrong. And it has no place in our courts. It has no place in our courtroom. So I think, the fact that I was appointed, I don't think it matters either way. I think the real critical question is I've got experience clerking at the Supreme Court, litigating huge cases before the Supreme Court that my opponent does not have. And I've done the work. I've been there. I've seen it firsthand. And so I think voters should take away that I have exactly the kind of experience you'd want at the Supreme Court. Somebody who's done law at a very high level, and somebody who's done it with the gravest of consequences, who sees the law longhand, which is a long view of the law, which is exactly what justices of the Supreme Court do. So I'm really proud of that work, and believe my work as a judge stands on its own merits.
Judge Neubauer, your appointment by Judge Doyle play a role in this campaign, ma'am?
Well, I was appointed by Governor Doyle in 2007. Before that, I was a litigator at Foley and Lardner here in Milwaukee for almost 20 years. I have extensive experience as a litigation attorney before I joined the court. I'd note that my opponent actually and I were at the same firm. I was there 19. He was there for a couple. And barely practiced law before he joined Walker as his chief legal counsel for 5 years. When I was appointed to the Court of Appeals, one of the justices said to me, Lisa, the best way to run a nonpartisan judicial campaign is to have broad bipartisan support. And I have done that every single time I have run. I ran in 2008. I went around to all the courthouses. I had 40 out of 45 of the judges in that race endorsing me. That's where I met so many of the sheriffs. I now have over 80 law enforcement officials supporting me, sheriffs, district attorneys, former district attorneys, red counties, blue counties. John Motz from Winnebago County, I met 11 years ago when I ran after Governor Doyle appointed me. I have the support of my Republican sheriff in Racine, in Kenosha, in Sheboygan, all across the state. So I did not see then that my appointment by Doyle was any kind of a problem, and I don't see that as being the case now because I have such broad bipartisan support all across this state. My opponent is largely focused on a very small group, and I am really proud to have the incredible depth of support and broad bipartisan support that I do in this race.
2 questions on the Supreme Court process. How should ethical complaints against Supreme Court justices be resolved if so many other justices withdraw that there's no majority left to resolve them? Point 1. Point 2, should the Constitution be changed to allow the temporary appointments to the Supreme Court of retired judges? And I think, Judge Neubauer, please.
Yeah, well, this really, I think, goes to the Prosser case where so many people recused that it couldn't be heard. And so, yes, it's a really, really significant issue that I think would be part and parcel of how we would look at the recusal petition that the retired judges submitted relating to, spending of millions and millions of dollars in our Supreme Court races. It is a really important issue that in our state constitution, if a justice recuses, there is no opportunity to have a replacement. So with every recusal, you lose someone, and that's a big deal. We've had cases come up through our court where on the Court of Appeals, our case went up to the Supreme Court, and one of the justices recused, and it ended up to be 3-3. Now, if I were a litigant or I were a party, I'd be very unhappy not to have had a full court. So I think that the recusal issue associated with the extraordinary amounts of money spent in our race would also need to take into account how do we deal with when a justice recuses, and should we be looking at changing our Constitution to address that situation?
And the second part of that question, should the Constitution be changed to allow the appointment on a temporary basis of retired judges?
Right, and that's my point, is
Okay.
that I think that because we don't have that now, that's an issue that should be looked at. Obviously, if a justice recuses, the question is, how would the replacement be handled? Who would pick? Where would they come from? So those are really important issues that we need to flesh out with public hearings and a full consideration.
Judge Hagedorn, please, on those two.
Sure, those are good questions. The core concern, of course, and the shared goal, I think, is to have courts where we have confidence in our courts. And I think it's unfortunate we've seen complaints against Supreme Court justices, and I'm hopeful moving forward. I truly am. And Judge Noubar is correct. We've had a very collegial court at District 2 Court of Appeals. And that's certainly something I hope to take up to the Supreme Court. We should be able to get along. We should be able to have legal arguments with one another, the good kind of legal arguments. We should have ears to hear criticism and ideas. And having worked at the Supreme Court and seen how dysfunctional, quite frankly, it was, I'm hopeful that with new people on the court who are not as divisive as we've seen, that we can continue to build a better culture on the court. I hope we don't see complaints against Supreme Court justices. That's unique in our history. I hope we don't go back to that again. As to what the remedy is for that, those are good questions. I think, like Judge Neubauer, I have an open mind on that. I'm open to ideas and thoughts about what we might do. Like I said, I do serve on the Judicial Commission, so I'm aware of the issues that come up. And it could be a real issue if you have a complaint against a Supreme Court justice, and there is no place to take it, depending on the type of issue that is there. So the Code of Judicial Conduct is outdated in some respects, and I think it deserves a full-scale review to make sure that we have a code that helps instill confidence in our courts all the way around.
Thank you. Question from a member of the audience. Can you comment on your stance on two issues, school choice and Second Amendment issues? Judge Hagedorn, I think it's your turn to go first.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the Second Amendment. I mean, we actually have a Constitution that's written, right? My job as a judge is to say what the law is, not what I think the law should be. And we not only have a Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, but we have a right to bear arms actually written into the Wisconsin Constitution. And that's a wonderful issue that I think highlights the importance of these philosophy questions. When asked on Friday whether she would support upholding the amendment that we have, Judge Neubauer, again, didn't answer the question. And so as to how that would play out to specifics, of course, I can't comment on that, depend on the issue, and we need to have an open mind in every case. But the question is not, do you agree or disagree with gun control laws? Do you support more or less of this or that? Obviously, can't comment on those. Those are policy questions. But we do have an amendment, and we need to be faithful to its text, to its original public meaning. And I will uphold and enforce the right to bear arms, which is, again, written into the Wisconsin Constitution. The people have put it there. School choice in Wisconsin, I hope that's a settled issue. We've last had a case on that 20 years ago. My opponent in this race has upheld as a model a justice who voted to strike it down twice. And there are folks who want to get the courts more involved in these sorts of issues. But I think the law is pretty clear on it. The United States Supreme Court has spoken clearly on it. So, you know, that's where the law stands right now.
Judge Neubauer, please.
Thank you. Yes. You know, I do think that this underscores, this kind of question underscores again how important it is that judges, sitting judges as well as candidates, really adhere to the Code of Judicial Conduct, which precludes us from commenting on issues that might come before the court. Why do we have those rules? We have those rules because we want the public to have confidence that every single judge comes to an issue with an open mind and that there's no prejudging going on. So on issues like this, because there are many issues that will be coming before the court and variations on the theme as well, those are issues that I would decline to comment on. My opponent is signaling every single day in this campaign how he's going to be leaning on things. He has put his ideology out there very extensively, not only in the past, but doing so to this very day. And his actions are also something that people need to look at. So, you know, as a judge founding a school, as a judge speaking to a group labeled as a hate group, it is so important that our voters have confidence in our courts. And it wasn't, you know, the very first courthouse that I visited after announcing in July, where one of the judges said to me, Lisa, when people walk through those courthouse doors, there's often this feeling of skepticism. Am I going to get a fair shake? Is there going to be a level playing field? Is there a thumb on the scale? And I have heard that in courthouse after courthouse after courthouse. It is so important that our people have restored confidence in our courts. And that is why 340 plus judges are supporting me. 98% of the endorsing judges. They are so longing, fighting to get our court to a place of judicial integrity. And integrity requires not signaling to the voters that I'm a conservative or a liberal. It requires being a judge, someone who looks at every single case with an open mind, no predetermined outcome, no ideology, no agenda.
Can I respond to that
30
briefly?
seconds, please, Your Honor.
Thank you. You know, Judge Neubauer didn't answer the question, and I find it really instructive that we have an actual written constitutional amendment. I mean, it's actually there. You can open up your Constitution and read it, and she won't even say she'll uphold and enforce that constitutional provision. That's not signaling anything. That's saying, here's what I believe. I'm going to uphold the Constitution the way it was actually written. And the way we build confidence in our courts is by not upholding the philosophy that she's upheld, political justices. I've been on the wrong side of that, and I don't ever want to see us go back there again. We need to have judges who say what the law is, not what they think that the law should be. Judge Neubauer has upheld that as a model, not that as a model, and I've been faithful in saying my job is to apply the law and just the law.
Given the partisan overtones and the context of this debate, a simple question. If you're elected to the Supreme Court, would you go to local, regional, or state political conventions? Judge Noubar, I think it's your turn to go first.
I think the answer is no. You know, I haven't as a judge. I have as a candidate, but I did not as a judge. You know, 11 years ago I joined the Court of Appeals. I haven't engaged in any partisan activities. So, again, I think it's so important for us to stay in our lane. You know, I went to a church on Sunday, and the pastor said, we have an assignment, and the assignment is to stay in our lane. And I really feel so strongly about making sure that our judiciary is, in fact, that true third branch, the independent, impartial third branch that is there for our people, that we have to have in any healthy democracy. It's what our founders envisioned. It's what I'm fighting for. So we just need to get our judiciary to its rightful place in our democracy where people can have trust and confidence that when they walk through those doors, they're going to be receiving justice. I am fighting for that in race, and I am getting such incredible support for it. Here we are at a bar event. I had 10 former state bar presidents write an op-ed supporting my candidacy, and the former executive director of the state bar. Why are they supporting me? They want us to get back to a place where we're electing our justices based on experience, qualifications, and merit. And resume to resume, I have 30 years in the law, 20 years, almost 20 years as a litigator, 11 on the Court of Appeals. I've had tremendous opportunities for leadership, not only on the Court of Appeals, but with state bar activities, with so many of the nonprofit activities I've done over the last 30 years. And so that's the kind of justice I'll be.
Judge Hagedorn, same question. Would you go to partisan events?
No, and I have not, other than as a candidate, other than campaigning. I agree. We should not have judges who are engaged in politics in any way. Judge Noubar, however, saying one thing and doing another, has gone to an anti-Trump political rally. That's something I would never do as a judge. And I've never done anything like that, and I would never do anything like that. We do want impartial judges, and the way to do that is to have judges who can understand their job, is to say what the law is, not what they think the law should be. And Judge Neubauer has shown in this race by highlighting personal issues and views, by targeting people of faith, by putting personal policy issues front and center. She says on the one hand she wants to be impartial, but utters the name Scott Walker with contempt under her breath. On the other hand, those are the sorts of things that show that she does have, in fact, a partisan agenda, and that she wants to carry on. And quite frankly, she continues to spout off the lies and misrepresentations by all the liberal special interest groups that she wants to write it as toxic. And now she's repeating every one of their toxic attacks, and at the same time saying she wants to be fair and impartial. Impartial judges don't hold up as a model for judicial decision-making, judges who've been political, as Judge Neubauer has. They don't go to political rallies that are against certain political candidates, like the president, of one stripe or another. I never have. I won't do that, other than obviously for campaign purposes. We're permitted to do that. It's a way to get your vote out. Both her and I have done that. But it's wrong what she did, and I certainly am not going to do that when, God willing, the people of Wisconsin entrust me with the job on the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
30-second response, Your Honor.
Yeah, thank you. So I went to a climate change march with my daughter, Greta. Greta was working at the march, and I was there to support her. I did not view it as a partisan activity in any way. It was about climate change. So I don't have any apologies for doing that and supporting my daughter. I do think it's also important in this race to look at what else have we done in our lives? What kind of a person is before you? And unfortunately, the questions don't always get that. But before, when I was a litigator, I always made sure to give back. I was on the board of Legal Action, providing legal services for the poor, United Way. I'm a breast cancer survivor, and I've been a mentor for women with breast cancer. The activities that I have done as a judge, I've also tried to give back in other ways other than being a judge. So I have been a tutor for young kids in the Racine Public Schools. I have also been a big sister for a wonderful young Hispanic woman for many years. And I have also been really involved in bench and bar and state bar activities, again, focused, on getting our judiciary to a place where we can have confidence in our courts, that when people walk through those doors, there's going to be a level playing field. So I have really focused my extracurricular activities as a judge in other ways of giving back through tutoring and other things, but also in really working within the court system through bench bar, through other activities with the PPAC, to figure out how we can ensure that our people can have confidence in our court system.
there a chance I could have a response since she had a long 30 seconds there?
Yeah, that was a long 30 seconds, so why don't you take a shorter 30 seconds, Your Honor?
Yes, very good. Thank you. Yeah, I've also been involved very deeply in my community. I'm really proud of being involved in my kids' school, which Judge Neubauer finds to be inappropriate. I'm proud to be speaking regular to law students, and I think it's great for people to be involved in civic, community, church-related things, and I applaud Judge Neubauer's work in that, and it's something that we've done as well. You know, our kids are involved in serving our community, and it's something that I believe in very deeply as well.
Judge Hagedorn, at the Milwaukee Press Club event, you said that the Supreme Court has a, quote, role to play, close quote, in fighting opioid, heroin, and the methamphetamine epidemic and abuse. Could you be specific how the court as an institution could fight that problem? And Judge Neubauer, do you think the Supreme Court has a duty or an obligation to play a role in fighting drug abuse and addiction? Judge Hagedorn?
Yeah, thank you. It's something I've been talking all around on the campaign trail. I'm proud to have the support of 45 sheriffs across the state of Wisconsin, far more than my opponent, the support of the Milwaukee Police Association in this race, because public safety is incredibly important. When I talk with sheriffs and others all across Wisconsin, this is an issue they talk about. Opioids here, up north and out west in particular, it's meth. It's an issue that doesn't get enough attention, quite frankly, but it's also something that's personal to me, as I've shared. Of our 5 children, our youngest daughter, Lily, she's 5 years old. She is adopted. And there's a long story there, but the very, very short story is my wife and I long wanted to adopt a child, just something that we thought at some point would happen in our marriage. And about 5 years ago, we heard about a birth mom and dad who'd struggled with drugs. And it was a very miraculous series of events. And we were able to come and adopt her. They voluntarily, the parents gave her to us, and she was in the hospital, addicted to opiates. We were there with her in the hospital. We were actually in the delivery room when she was born. It was beautiful and sad and all those things you can imagine at the same time. And she was withdrawing from those drugs for about a week, opiates. And so it's something that's personal to me as well. The court does have an important role to play through our decision making and keeping our communities safe. That's why sheriffs are supporting me in this race. And also we do that through some of the initiatives we have, like drug treatment courts, through the way we budget money on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has administrative authority over the court system. And therefore has a real way you can impact these discussions. There's statewide criminal justice coordinating councils and local ones as well that judges are regularly a part of. So, you know, the criminal justice system and judges in particular are one piece of the puzzle in a larger community-wide effort. And this is more than just the justice system. You know, we do want to help those who are hurting. We do want to support them who are people who are addicted. We also need to hold people accountable on the Supreme Court as well, those who are bringing that poison into our communities.
Judge Neubauer, does the court have a role in fighting drug abuse and addiction?
Yes, I think the court definitely has a role, and it does require leadership from the top. I have been, as a member of the Court of Appeals, on the Policy and Planning Committee. It's called PPAC, and I was actually on the Strategy Committee for that. Every year sets the goals and the priorities for the court system, and among those are many programs that are happening in our circuit courts, including alternatives to incarceration. So drug and alcohol treatment courts, some counties have veterans courts. I was up in Green Bay at the only state heroin court a week or so ago. There's also a few counties that have mental health courts. These are all initiatives that are an attempt to deal with the opioid crisis, with the meth crisis, but also people with just plain mental health issues that come into our court system. And we are working on developing ways to figure out when it's safe, how do we get these people the treatment they need and out of the court system when it's appropriate. I have been involved on a hands-on basis in those efforts. I've also, in my local Racine, we have a coordinating council that looks at these things as well as other things, like whether people should, what's the analysis for figuring out when people should be released from jail, pre-trial and when it's safe to do so, when not. And so I have been involved in this as a judge, and I would very much look forward to continuing those efforts on the Supreme Court, because we can do better. We can do more of this. We can figure out what's working, what's not, and figure out how to go forward to best deal with these issues.
One more question before we go to 1-minute closing statements. It's this. You're both on the Court of Appeals. You're both veteran judges. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing Wisconsin courts over the next 5 or 10 years? Judge Noubar, please.
Well, that's a great question. I've been all over our state over the last 11 months. I've visited almost 40 courthouses, and I would tell you that every single courthouse that I've gone to is struggling. And it is in large part because of the opioid crisis and the meth crisis up north. But it's also just getting the kind of treatment with health and human services that counties need. I was up in one county where they said that they're just being swamped with meth, and they have no treatment program in that county. I talked to Judge Yackel up in Sawyer County, who is supporting me, and he said that he has so many felony cases and huge issue with the public defender rate in getting lawyers to represent people. He said the case, one case, they called 2,000 people to get a lawyer to represent someone. So there are really serious issues facing our courts, and leadership from the Supreme Court is critical on these issues so that we can figure out how to do a better job. And ultimately, for people with mental health issues, for people with substance abuse issues, it's about public safety. How do we get these people back on track so they don't go out and recommit? I had a grandfather who committed suicide. He was an alcoholic. He lived in the 50s, had no help, nowhere to turn. We now know so much more about alcoholism, about mental health issues. We have programs. We need to figure out how we as a court system can work with DAs, sheriffs, public defenders to be more effective in these kinds of issues.
Judge Hagedorn, biggest choices facing our court system?
We live in politically divisive times. We live at times where politics seems to consume so many people and divide so many people. And the most critical challenge facing the Wisconsin court system is to not let our court become politicized. It's to have confidence in our courts that judges are going to decide cases based on the law. I had been in court where I didn't believe where I was going to get a fair hearing because of my client at the Wisconsin Supreme Court. That should never, ever happen. We should know that judges are going to be faithful to say what the law is and not what they think the law should be, particularly when the other political branches are having the fights that political branches, have always had throughout history. But we do law, not politics. And so we cannot continue on the legacy, as Judge Neubauer wants to do, of the justice we're seeking to replace. We cannot have political activists on the court. And what we've seen is these liberal special interest groups who are supporting my opponent, they're doing so because they understand that she's going to support their partisan political agenda. There's a reason why my opponent is running on personal views, because she obviously thinks that's what's relevant for judging, but it's not. There's been no criticism, not one, of my judicial record, of my being faithful to apply the law. And I've done it faithfully, and I will do it on the Supreme Court. My job is to set aside my own views and apply the law as written, and that's what we need in our courts from everybody. That is the most critical issue. That's how we build trust. We rebuild trust by getting politics out of the court and having judges who know their job is to set aside their views, to say what the law is, not what they think the law should be.
Thank you. I didn't get to all my questions. I didn't get to all yours, but time constraints. Closing remarks by process of the draw, Judge Neubauer and then Judge Hagedorn. Please.
Right. So thank you again to the Milwaukee Bar. Thank you to all you, the people in attendance, and thank you to the media and the listeners. Again, I do think the most important issue in this race is who is going to be fair, impartial, independent. I have over 30 years experience in the law, 11 on the Court of Appeals. I was appointed by the Wisconsin Supreme Court to be the chief judge of our Court of Appeals 2 times. I've been elected 2 times by the people in our Court of Appeals district. And I have such a deep and abiding commitment to making sure that our Supreme Court has judicial integrity, that we can restore the people's confidence in our courts, starting at the top, that our judges will be fair, impartial, independent. The 98% of endorsing judges, over 80 elected Dems and Republican sheriffs, DAs, former DAs, supporting me, trust that I will do that. I am very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Judge Hagedorn, please.
This race really is about the future of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and the winner of this election will likely help determine the judicial philosophy that governs the court for the next 10 or 20 years, and that's why it's so critical. I too want a court that's impartial, but continuing on the legacy of the justice that we want to replace is not impartial judging. Putting personal views front and center is not impartial judging. Targeting people of faith is not impartial judging at all. I believe my job is to set aside my own views, to uphold the Constitution as written, to uphold the laws as they've been written. It doesn't matter which political party writes the laws. I have always done that on the Court of Appeals. It's why nobody's attacking my judicial record, because I've never done it. The empty rhetoric you hear from the liberal special interest groups that Judge Neubauer keeps repeating have no place in this race, and they're an effort to malign me because they want to take over the court to accomplish their political agenda. We cannot let that happen. I will defend the rule of law, uphold the Constitution, and protect the public on the Supreme Court.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As someone who's covered the Capitol for 30 years, I have great respect for people who seek public office. So before Judge D'Amato dismisses us, would you join me in thanking our candidates?
As we bring this forum to a close, I have 4 thank yous and 4 reminders. First of all, I want to thank Steve Walters for moderating this judicial forum. I'd like to thank Judge Neubauer and Judge Hagedorn for participating in this forum, for being here to answer your questions. I want to thank all of you for being here. It's really important to be informed, and you can get informed when you come to a forum such as this. And then my 4th thank you is Katie Borowski and her staff for putting on this forum today. It was terrific, and we thank you for it. My 4 reminders, I want to remind all of you that we have one more judicial forum yet this year. On Thursday, the Milwaukee Bar Association is going to have its Circuit Court Judicial Forum. We have 1 contested election in Branch 40, Judge Andrew Jones and Attorney Danielle Shelton. They will be here. They will answer questions that are put to them at that forum. I want to remind all of you, as I'm sure you know, the 2019 spring election is Tuesday, April 2nd. I want to remind all the members of the Milwaukee Bar Association, you should have received your ballot for the annual judicial poll. You're getting those by email. You respond by email. Fill them out and return them by the deadline, and the results will be posted prior to the spring election. And then once again, I want to remind everybody to vote in the spring election on April 2nd, and please remind your family, your friends, to vote. Remember, voting is not a right, it is a duty that you owe to your community if you really care about your courts and your government. Thank you for being here.